Welcome to this afternoon's debate, Miracle of Mind. Despite the advances in neuroscience and the rapidly extending capacity of computers, we still have no adequate theory of consciousness, no account of how the brain is able to create experience, and no account of how the material stuff of the brain can be responsible for thought. Should we conclude that consciousness cannot be explained in terms of the physical? And if so, what is the alternative? Or is it just a matter of time? And one day an AI machine will miraculously find itself experiencing the world and its mere components will have soul. Well, with me, a great panel to explore this deep and fundamental question. Tim Crane is a leading philosopher from what is sometimes referred to as the analytic school. He's currently professor at the Central European University, formerly at Cambridge, and has written widely on the philosophy of mind. Susan Blackmore is a writer and psychologist, best known for her book, The Meme Machine, now translated, Sue, I think into 16 languages.
Something like that, yeah. But not so relevant. The big textbook on consciousness is much more relevant today.
And I was going to say, and your textbook, Consciousness and Introduction, which is surely something that everyone who is taking part in this debate should have already read. And Bernardo Kastrup is a Dutch computer scientist and philosopher and a prominent advocate of metaphysical idealism, a view that's been deeply unfashionable in philosophical circles for at least a century, and which he is doing his best to get us re-engaged in. He's also the author of the book, The Idea of the World. So, is consciousness purely physical? And if not, what is the alternative? So, Tim, if you can kick off for us.
Thanks, Hilary. Well, I think of consciousness as a feature or property of certain mental occurrences, mental episodes, thoughts, feelings, sensations, conscious perceptual experiences. And these are properties ultimately of living organisms. And they are determined by what's going on inside the organism and what's going on outside the organism, some combination of those things. Does that mean that consciousness is physical? Well, here I have to turn into a philosopher and I say, well, I'm sorry, but that depends what you mean by physical. The idea that consciousness might be physical has been tied to the doctrine of physicalism, which is a kind of inheritor of the 17th century notion of materialism, the idea that everything is matter or everything is made of matter. Physicalism says something slightly different because it says that it ties its doctrine to physics and what physical science says, so it's physics strictly speaking. I don't think there's any reason to think that consciousness is physical in that sense, that it's physical science that's going to tell us what the nature of consciousness is. I think consciousness is a feature that of the states of living beings and not inanimate beings. Inanimate beings don't have consciousness. I think you have to be living to have consciousness. And I take that to be obvious. I know some people object to this, but people are going to object. So what I want to say is that consciousness is not physical in the sense that physicalism or materialism says that everything is physical. Nonetheless, consciousness is, I think, a property or feature of organisms, which are material objects in the sense that they have material properties and qualities and things like that. Well, that doesn't tell you anything about how to explain consciousness or how to understand it. It's just getting clear on the basic issue of whether you should think consciousness is something physical. I think consciousness is something psychological, and the psychological emerges out of the biological in a way that we don't understand. But that's my appeal to the idea of emergence there is serious, because I think that there are some stages in the evolution of the world and the evolution of organisms where new things genuinely come into existence, and whether or not we can understand how those things came into existence is an open question.
Thank you, Tim. Sue.
Well, I'm going to start and probably end with perplexity. It is so difficult, this problem. I want, before trying to answer directly, just to say, anyone who thinks they've got an answer to this, I would suggest is either an absolute genius or mistaken. And we were laughing earlier about all the emails that we get with people's theories. It is really hard. It's hard because of dualism. Tim has already kind of referred to that, but sitting here at my desk looking at this screen, there seem to be two completely kind of different kind of things in the world. My experience of looking at these four faces here, or out over there, over the river at the field and the green trees, all those questions about, is your green the same as mine? And how do I know that any of you are conscious like I am? And we can't. All these problems are really serious. Now, my response to this is neither of the classic positions, one of which is materialism, and Tim's already said a bit about this, but I would think the vast majority of people working on consciousness probably are materialists, certainly the majority, and they have the problem, obviously, of if you believe there is a material world there and it's responsible for everything, then kind of things Hilary said at the beginning, with which I absolutely disagree. They've got to try and understand how a physical brain can produce consciousness. That's the classic hard problem, defined by Dave Chalmers as to understand how subjective, i.e. personal, private experience can arise from physical activity in the brain, objective activity in the brain. It doesn't work. If we find ourselves in the hard problem, I think we should realize we've got something wrong. The hard problem says arises, Hilary said is created by. You're stuck in dualism, which nearly everybody agrees doesn't work. But now you take the other view, idealism, which I hope we are going to hear much more about. And I would like to hear how Bernardo deals with this, because the classic problem of idealism is, well, why do we think there's a physical world? Or why does it make sense? Why do you and I agree that we can see these pictures of each other and you can hear this voice and so on? I sit of an evening, I love just at the end of the day, just puzzling over this. And it seems to me that in a way, obviously everything's mind, not matter. Because the only thing that I have access to is the experiences, the books I've read that explain about molecules and atoms and all that stuff. It's still my experience of reading them and engaging with the science. So I get that feeling that it has to all be mind, but I cannot see how then we get physics and all of that kind of stuff. So where do I go from there? Personally, I go to illusionism. I am a so-called illusionist. I think the way to tackle this problem is to say we humans in general, with our language and our upbringing and our culture and our societies, we are deluded about the nature of consciousness. We are deluded in the sense that when we think about consciousness and talk about it, we say, I am conscious of this. There's the contents of consciousness. Consciousness isn't a container, but we talk about it like that. Some things come into consciousness and some go out. There's a sort of place where they happen. People look for the neural correlates of consciousness, where it happens, the magic. You mentioned magic earlier, Hilary, and that's a problem. It's mysterious and it's magical. So my view is we have to go at this from two directions. One, the scientific and philosophical, the other, the personal inquiry. Because, of course, mystics throughout the ages have said the same thing. We're deluded about the nature of self and about the nature of the world. And there are many, many people, myself included, who've trained over decades and decades to be able to get into a state where self and other become one. There isn't any distinction. The problem of dualism has gone away. But I can't go from that to a scientific or philosophical answer. So there we are. I'm back to perplexity. And I think that's a good place to be.
Thank you, Sue. Bernardo.
I think by virtue of the way we've defined the physical, consciousness is not physical by definition, and worse yet, it cannot even be reduced to the physical because of that definition. You see, we define the physical as basically that which has no phenomenal qualities, that which is exhaustively described in terms of a list of abstract quantities such as mass, charge, momentum, spin, geometric relationships, frequency, amplitude, and so on and so forth. And of course, there is nothing about these abstract quantities in terms of which we could deduce the quality of seeing a red apple or tasting the apple, or the quality of feeling a bellyache or falling in love. So by definition, we've turned these two domains into incommensurable domains. One is a given experience, the qualities of our inner life, and the other is a conceptual creation, the physical world. I think the way this divide came about was that quantities are very handy for describing the relative differences of the qualities of experience. For instance, if I see red, that's different from seeing blue, and there is a very handy way to describe this difference in terms of a frequency delta, which is a number. But then we've taken this description, this handy description of relative differences between qualities, and we said, well, this is actually an existent. It exists in and of itself, and we called it matter and energy, or the physical world out there. We gave it an ontological reality that it didn't have in the beginning. It was a mere description of something else. And worse yet, we not only edified it as an independent ontological reality, we now try to reduce the qualities, which is where we started, to that conceptual creation of consciousness, which exists in consciousness. And that, of course, cannot work. I think the misstep was that...
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.